Теперь в случае размещения там военных контингентов и инфраструктуры мы вынуждены будем отвечать зеркально.
A major military shift is taking place on the Finnish border. Satellite images have revealed changes in military activity at 4 large Russian bases on the Finnish border over the past few months. In particular, the deployment of 45 Russian bomber aircraft at the Olenya Airbase on the Kola Peninsula has caused a stir in the international media. Russia is also making new or expanded preparations at bases such as Severomorsk, Kamenka, and Petrozavodsk, including helicopters, military tents, and armored vehicles. The military activity along the Finnish border is so intense that it is hard not to wonder, is this a defensive panic, or is it preparation for a new invasion?
I don't think anyone can trust Vladimir Putin.
We last saw this kind of preparation towards the end of 2021 on the Ukrainian border. Now we are seeing it on the Finnish border. While Russia is amassing air and ground forces in regions close to the Arctic, Sweden and Finland are also responding with countermeasures to enhance their defense capabilities. In this comprehensive video, we will examine the possible reasons behind Russia's military moves at strategic bases on the Finnish border and the defense strategies of Sweden and Finland in response. The video also includes a multidimensional analysis of the rising tensions in the Arctic region. To understand the military activity along the Finnish border, we first need to examine what message Russia aims to convey by deploying bombers in Olenya and why Putin chose Olenya. The Olenya airbase is located on the Kola Peninsula, near the city of Murmansk. NATO and Western intelligence describe Olenya as a critical northern base for Russia's long-range aviation capabilities. Since the Soviet era, the airstrips here have been built to withstand the harsh Arctic conditions. While Russia has deployed strategic bombers such as the Tu-95, Tu-160, and Tu-22M3 at Olenya at various times, bringing 45 bombers to the base simultaneously is extremely rare, even unprecedented. The relocation of such a large number of bombers to a single base could indicate the possibility of a major exercise or an operation planned in the near future. Moreover, Olenya is relatively close to NATO territory, particularly Finland. The distances involved, just around 1,000 kilometers, allow these aircraft to fly over the Baltic Sea, the Arctic Ocean, or even the Atlantic if necessary. Therefore, the gathering of 45 bombers at this base could also be interpreted as Russia sending a message to Finland and Scandinavia in general that it is present in the region. So how were these 45 bombers distributed following Putin's unexpected move? How were the Tu-95, Tu-22M3, and others deployed at Olenya? Reports based on satellite imagery indicate that Olenya currently houses 10 Tu-95MS Bear H bombers, 35 Tu-22M3 Backfire C bombers, and 12 Cub transport aircraft, 2 134UBL Krusty training aircraft, and Mi-8 HIP helicopters. This diversity indicates preparations not only for strategic bombing, but also for transport, logistics, training, and tactical purposes. The Tu-95MS and Tu-22M3 are among Russia's primary platforms for long-range cruise missiles and nuclear payloads. Such a large-scale deployment has been observed in the past prior to missile attacks on Ukraine. However, this time it is not near the Ukrainian front, but further north, closer to the Finnish border, raising questions about whether the target is Ukraine or another intention in Scandinavia. Some experts argue that Russia aims to maintain missile pressure on Ukraine, while also increasing deterrence in the north in response to Finland's NATO membership. What about the deployment of combat helicopters in Severomorsk, considered the heart of the Russian Navy? Another strategic base in the Murmansk region is Severomorsk. Russia's northern fleet has its main headquarters in this region. Therefore, naval aviation, naval ships, submarines, and land support units are also concentrated in this area. Leaks confirm the increased war helicopter traffic in Severomorsk in recent times. It is reported that even attack helicopters such as the Ka-52, Hokumbi, or Mi-28, Havoc, have been transferred to the region as part of the Northern Fleet's aviation group. According to some analysts, these helicopters are normally used on the Ukrainian front. Therefore, their redeployment to Severomorsk is interpreted as Russia adding an additional layer to its northern defense. These helicopters, equipped with gear suitable for colder climates, can be used against both naval and land targets in the Arctic region. They can also be positioned to provide combat support near the borders of Finland or Norway. Severomorsk is a logistics base for Russian naval ships patrolling Arctic waters. The helicopters are ideal for providing air cover for ships and close air support for mobile ground units. If Russia is planning any Arctic operations, these helicopters could be used in the first wave or in ship-to-shore operations. Another possibility is to simply strengthen our air presence in the region, claiming that we are deterring neighboring countries such as Norway, Finland, and Sweden. What about the 130 military tents in Kamenka, which can accommodate 2,000 soldiers, and the suspicious activity of the soldiers arriving in the area? Why did Russia choose Kamenka to set up hundreds of military tents? Russia has many military sites named Kamenka near the Baltic or Barents Sea. The Kamenka mentioned in satellite data is likely located relatively close to the Finnish border, in the Leningrad region, or near the borders of the Karelia Republic. Reports indicate that approximately 130 large military tents, capable of housing over 2,000 soldiers, have been constructed at these camps, suggesting that Russia is deploying troops on a battalion or brigade scale. Erecting so many tents in the region could mean that traditional barracks are insufficient, or that rapidly assembled units are not being permanently stationed in facilities.
We all agree in NATO that Russia is the long-term threat to NATO territory, to the whole of the Euro-Atlantic territory.
Russia may be shifting reserve units or troops from a new wave of mobilization to the northern front. This could be part of efforts to establish protection and pressure along the Finnish border. Especially after Finland's accession to NATO, Russia feels the need to maintain additional troops in the northeastern border region. Analysts also suggest that such a large tent camp in Kamenka may have been set up for training purposes. Russia may want to maintain a mobile force on the Finnish border in case of the worst-case scenario. This camp could house a rapid response force capable of moving quickly. Artillery, air defense, and even light armored units may be deployed here. In any case, a large Russian military presence near the border is a worrying development for Finland. Now let's look at the 3 new hangars in Petrozavodsk and the dozens of armored vehicles found there. Why is this kind of military activity taking place in the heart of Karelia? Petrozavodsk is the capital of the Republic of Karelia. This region is also relatively close to the Finnish border. Satellite-based reports indicate that 3 new military hangars have been constructed near Petrozavodsk, and that over 50 armored vehicles, likely BMPs, BTRs, or T-72, T-80 tanks, are being housed there. This construction activity reflects Russia's intention to increase its logistics and vehicle maintenance capacity. Hangars are important for the protection of armored vehicles in harsh winter conditions. During the Soviet era, the defense lines in the Karelia direction played a critical role in any military operation plan against Finland. Therefore, Petrozavodsk could serve as a rear logistics center. The armored vehicles stationed there can be quickly deployed to the border when necessary. Finland's full NATO membership and its base agreements with the US are also pushing Russia to strengthen its presence along the Karelia line. Some security experts argue that Russia has deployed these armored vehicles not for offensive purposes, but primarily for defense and deterrence. This is because the Russian army, which suffered significant losses in the Ukraine war, is unlikely to attack a NATO country like Finland. However, by demonstrating a large armored presence on the border, Russia aims to send a message to Finland and neighboring countries that it will remain in the region regardless of NATO's stance. On the other hand, Russian military doctrine includes statements that any steps taken by the West against its Arctic plans are considered legitimate, which maintains uncertainty. Meanwhile, is the West and NATO members in the region maintaining their silence while Russia does all this? Of course not. Sweden has responded to Russia's military deployments in various strategic centers, including Olenya, and has begun to highlight its STV tanks. The STV abbreviation used by the Swedish military may refer to the Stridsvagn 122 or similar tank models, also known as Stridsvagn. Sweden operates the STRV 122, which is adapted from the Leopard 2A5. These tanks are equipped with advanced armor, modern fire control systems, and thermal cameras, making them well suited for Arctic conditions. The increase in STV tank activity at 4 different locations could be interpreted as Sweden taking deterrent measures against Russia's buildup at Olenya and other bases. In particular, Arctic brigades and STV tank companies are conducting exercises in northern Sweden to prepare for potential Russian border violations. According to information leaked from the Swedish Ministry of Defense, these 4 locations may be strategic passages or areas close to the Norwegian-Finnish border. It is also important to take a closer look at Sweden's NATO path and Arctic strategy. Although Sweden has historically remained a neutral country, it has made fundamental changes to its security policy following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The process of joining NATO, together with Finland, has transformed the Scandinavian security architecture. After joining NATO, Sweden began to cooperate more closely with the West. Therefore, Sweden is responding to Russia's moves in the north with coordinated military exercises with its allies and patrols by STV tanks. The sensitivity of the Arctic region in particular is pushing the Swedish army to become a permanent force in this geography. What steps has Finland taken in response to Russia's military movements in Olenya, Severomorsk, Kamenka, and Petrozavodsk? Finland, which officially joined NATO in 2023, quickly signed agreements to strengthen military cooperation with the U.S. These agreements grant U.S. forces access to 15 military bases and training areas on Finnish territory. This significantly eases Finland's position against Russia's buildup in Olenya. U.S. air and ground forces can be deployed very quickly from Finnish territory if necessary. These bases are likely to cover a wide area from southern Finland to the Lapland region. The U.S. could use these areas for exercises or joint defense plans. Some Finnish government officials have stated that we can coordinate with the U.S. to strengthen our air defense against Russian bombers taking off from Olenya. This sends a message to Moscow that if you take an aggressive stance, you will face NATO and the U.S. Finland is also rapidly modernizing its defense capabilities. F-35 fighter jets have been ordered, coastal defense artillery has been purchased, and long-range missiles are in service. Behind these moves lies a search for security against Russia's intentions, particularly in the Karelia region. In addition, Finland is closely monitoring Russian naval activities by installing new maritime radar systems along the Baltic Sea coast. In this context, it is reported that the activity in Olenya is being closely monitored by Finnish intelligence. So, despite all these defense measures by NATO member Scandinavian forces, what could Russia's real objective be? Is Putin trying to demonstrate deterrence or preparations for an attack? Russia's deployment of 45 bomber aircraft to Olenya and additional military buildup at locations such as Severomorsk, Kamenka, and Petrozavodsk has fueled claims of large-scale attack plans. However, many analysts believe this is more of a deterrent and a show of force. Russia is responding to NATO with a show of force on the military front. Still, when platforms like the Tu-95MS and Tu-22M3, which have nuclear bombing capabilities, are involved, it's hard to call it just bluffing. Russia could also launch hypersonic cruise missiles with these planes. Scenarios targeting the U.S. via the Arctic have been on the table since the Cold War. Therefore, the Kremlin is likely pursuing a strategy of keeping both NATO and the U.S. occupied on this front. So, is there a connection between this issue and Ukraine? Some experts suggest that Russia may be trying to divide the West by making such moves on the northern front due to its weakening position on the Ukrainian front. So, the question is whether Europe will worry about the Finnish border and reduce its aid to Ukraine. This strategy could, at least in part, create a two-front tension in the West. However, NATO countries are not falling into this trap, continuing their support for Ukraine while simultaneously strengthening the Finland-Sweden-Norway line. Can NATO force Putin to back down from such a military deployment? To answer this question, we must calculate the collective deterrence of Sweden, Finland, and the US in the deepest detail. Russia's bombers in Olenya and northern base buildups are being countered by Sweden increasing STV tank activities in 4 different locations, Finland granting the US access to 15 bases, and the US responding with Arctic patrol aircraft. This collective deterrence makes any potential Russian attack or aggressive military exercises costly. Putin may think that if we make a simple move, the Sweden-Norway-Finland-US line could surround us. Thus, avoiding escalation into a hot conflict becomes more rational. Diplomatic and economic pressure should not be overlooked either. The Russian economy is already shaken by the challenges of the Ukraine war and international sanctions. Tensions with Scandinavia could further complicate access to the EU market. Additionally, the Arctic Council and other cooperation mechanisms could exclude Russia. These factors may push Putin's administration to stop escalating tensions in the north. Therefore, the permanent stay of 45 bomber aircraft there may be limited. All these details we mentioned in our video, Russia's deployment of 45 bomber aircraft to the Olenya Airbase, combat helicopters to Severomorsk, housing 2,000 soldiers in 130 tents in Kamenka, deploying 3 new hangars and more than 50 armored vehicles in Petrozavodsk, and a new show of force along the Scandinavian line. These steps continue to worry northern neighbors, especially Finland and Sweden. As mentioned, Sweden is strengthening its deterrence by increasing STV tank activities in 4 locations, while Finland has announced that it is ready to respond quickly to any Russian attack on its border through a 15-base agreement with the US. Thus, the Arctic region and Northern Europe are becoming a second geopolitical flashpoint alongside Russia's Ukraine-focused war. Despite being uncomfortable with NATO's expansion northward, can the Putin administration risk a multi-front conflict? At this point, the coordinated stance of the US and NATO allies is attempting to deter Russia. Sweden's accession to NATO has completely changed the security architecture on Russia's northwestern border. In the coming period, developments such as military exercises in the Arctic, Russia's construction of new bases, and Finland's potential deployment of air defense systems within the NATO framework should be closely monitored. Looking at the bigger picture, Russia's move to deploy 45 bombers in Olenya is not independent of the war in Ukraine, but may be a reflection of the defeat there and the search for a new balance in Europe. While Putin seeks to preserve the influence of the former Soviet Union in the north, the Scandinavian countries and the Western Alliance are drawing red lines. The direction this process will take appears to depend largely on diplomatic initiatives and how both sides utilize their military options. This new landscape, which is witnessing the highest level of tension since the end of the Cold War, may hold the most critical geopolitical chess moves of the 21st century in Northern Europe. Questions such as whether the bombers in Olenya will take off, where Swedish tanks will be deployed, and to what extent US military presence in Finland will increase are likely to shape the region's future. In short, Russia's large-scale buildup along its northwestern border, the harsh response from the Scandinavian countries, and the active involvement of the US are proof that the Arctic is rapidly turning into a high-tension zone. Whether these developments will force Putin to back down or push Russia into an even more aggressive stance remains unclear. However, what is certain is that the Arctic region will increase its influence in global politics in the near future, and the struggle between Russia and the West will continue here in a fierce manner. Thank you for watching.